and welcome to Action4Canada Seminar for Businesses. I'm Tanya Gaw, and I'm a founder of Action4Canada. We're a grassroots movement reaching out to millions of Canadians and uniting our voices in opposition to the destructive policies tearing at the fabric of this nation. Through call to action campaigns, we are working to equip citizens to take action. We are committed to protecting faith, family, and freedom. We're a not-for-profit organization and fully funded by donors. Denise will bring up our disclaimer, and we'll just read that out before we commence the rest of the meeting. So the information presented at this meeting is for general information purposes only. While we endeavor to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, about the completeness, accuracy, reliability, suitability, or availability of the information we provide. Any reliance you place on such information is therefore strictly at your own risk. The information we provide should not be used as a substitute for advice from a qualified legal professional, healthcare practitioner, or appropriate licensed professional. All right, so the reason we're here today is because we really care about our small businesses, and you are not only an essential and vital part of our communities, you have been supporting our Little League teams and numerous other community events, but you are central to a thriving economy and to the future of Canada. This is why back in October, Action4Canada launched a business campaign in BC, reaching out to small businesses to support all of you and advise you of your rights as well as your duties. The campaign has been so successful that we are rolling it out across Canada. Today, we're going to review these important resources, namely to know your rights and duties as business owners, but more importantly, to inform you of the government's role and their limitations. Action4Canada developed a Freedom and Rights Declaration for business owners to sign and send to their Premier and Health Officer, advising them that they will no longer comply with the orders because they are unlawful, irrational, inconsistent, and in violation of our Constitution. Small businesses are under attack, and it's time we put a stop to it. We are counting on all of you here today to help us help you and make this happen, but no one can do it alone. We have with us today a number of experts in their field with lots of experience and knowledge directly applicable to you and your business. We will cover the laws that apply directly to you, identify where the government is acting outside the law. We will talk with a retired constable who will give you great advice when dealing with the police officers and bylaw officers, and we will give you the tools you need to see how you are being manipulated into complying with orders that are designed to destroy your business. Knowledge is power, and that's why we're here today, to empower you. To begin our presentation, I would like to introduce you to Denise O'Donnell, who takes her knowledge and experience from sales and real estate investing and applies it directly to our situation today. She's prepared a thought-provoking presentation on how common sales and marketing techniques are being weaponized to disempower business owners. Again, knowledge is power, and that's what she's going to give you today. So hang on to your hats. Here you go, Denise.
Thanks very much, Tanya. Just quickly for everybody in the audience watching on Zoom, depending if you watch presentations or not before, if you go to the upper right corner of your screen, you'll see a little button that says View. If you toggle your mouse over that little button, you'll see a drop-down menu where you can click Speaker View. And that is going to open up my PowerPoint presentation and a picture of my face right beside it. There'll be a little margin in the middle, and you can now slide that margin back and forth. So if everybody tries that out, you can make the PowerPoint presentation about 2/3 of the screen, and then make my face about 1/3 big, and that'll be your optimal viewing. Okay, so with that, we will just jump right in. So like Tanya said, there's so much going on. Really, why we're here today is to help you guys make sense of this new normal and give you all the tools that you are going to need to figure out how to navigate it. So we're just going to start off by taking a look at how far we've come. You know, if you look at just 1 year ago today, these kind of scenes were super common, right? We had our Canada Day parade. Those of us who have kids or grandkids, we were watching them in their sporting events. We had meals together, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then, of course, grandparents got to spend time with their little ones and families. I know for myself, I have not seen my own mom since November. So yeah, compare that to what we're doing today. Driving around, you're going to see schoolyards empty or significantly reduced because, you know, kids can only be out there in their little cohorts. Seniors being separated from their families. And of course, for those of you who travel, airports and stations look a lot like this. For those of you restaurant owners or moviegoers, you'll remember that we went from this to this in only a few months. So of course, as business owners, not only do you have the regular struggles of running your day-to-day business, now you've been inundated with all these other duties and responsibilities, as well as constantly changing laws. We keep getting told, guess what? We're in the new normal. And that includes trying to balance the rights and the values of competing worldviews. So what we really want to do for you here today is to take all of these different competing values and struggles and bylaws and give you some tools that you're going to need to prioritize them and analyze them. So we're going to look at our culture today in terms of freedom versus tyranny. We're going to spend some time looking at media manipulation techniques. And of course, we're going to have the police officer come in and help you navigate dealing with other police officers, bylaw officers, and of course, the top constitutional lawyer will, and as well as the co-founder of Action4Canada will walk you through our constitutional law and how that law applies to you. And of course, what cases are before the courts right now. So we're going to take all that information and give you some solutions. So at Action4Canada, we're going to give you 5 frameworks. We're going to help you make sense of the new normal. We're going to empower your position. We want you to know your law and your rights. And we mainly want to name what's at stake, which of course is your future and the freedom of all Canadians. All right, so just to start off, you know, for a long time, we've been a Judeo-Christian background nation, but really what we are starting to see now is the fruits of a new religion. And this religion, some call it communism, some call it socialism. It's basically being taught in our schools now. Their schools are being used as a seminary to teach these new tenets. And these tenets are hell-bent on the destruction of the West and of our free market capitalist system. So when we watch TV, most of the conversations in our day-to-day life take place at this top level, right, at the cultural level. But I want to take a moment to just sit and look at what's going on underneath that. Where do these cultural ideas come from? And of course, underneath that is this idea of philosophy and religion. So for the last 50, 60 years, the United States, Canada, the West has been based on this idea of freedom, the pursuit of happiness, the American dream, which we've enjoyed here in Canada as well. But underlying that, it's important to take a quick look and understand that it's based on these 3 key ideas that came out of the Judeo-Christian West. That is the idea that the individual is sovereign. They are divine. They're the ones we need to empower to ensure future growth and freedom. Of course, the 10 commandments of the Bible, that's where all of our body of law comes from today, our Constitution. And there's this idea of the voluntary acceptance of the cross or voluntary acceptance of personal responsibility. And that's what's made our country so great. But of course, what's been happening is that there's this new ideology at work that really wants to replace our capitalist system with this much more controlled tyrannical system. This ideology is hard at work to undermine our freedom. So first, it has to work really hard to destroy that base at the bottom. And we're seeing the fruits now of that new religion. We're seeing increased fines and regulations. We're seeing forced compliance. And of course, in the last 10 months or so, we're seeing more and more businesses going into bankruptcy. So taking a look at what's underlying that culture, this new cancel culture, is of course the Marxist, communist, socialist religion. And the tenets of this religion are this, right? This idea that the collective is sovereign, not the individual. We value your identity as a group member rather than your identity as a person. Okay, we're seeing more and more intrusive government. Anytime this new religion or this new socialism idea has been tried, whether that's Maoist China or Stalin's Russia or Venezuela is a more modern example today, we see nothing but slavery, tyranny, and ultimately starvation and death. So a lot of these ideas have come from this man in the 1800s. Karl Marx wrote a Communist Manifesto. Him and another of other big thinkers and philosophers understood that if they wanted to get their way and get their agenda passed, they'd have to destroy the West. So first step of all, corrupt the young, get them away from religion, encourage interest in sex at a very early age, get them to focus on things like sports and entertainment and trivial things rather than family and major principles. When he wrote his Communist Manifesto, it basically replaced our 10 commandments. So this one focuses on the abolition of personal property. Of course, we're seeing that now. Individual businesses are going bankrupt. They're losing what they own, and you're seeing that wealth move to the bigger corporations. We're seeing heavier progressive tax, abolition of inheritance. We're seeing an growth in central banking, state-controlled communication, and state-controlled education of our children. It's amazing, when this was written in the mid-1800s, I don't know that he had any idea how far his agenda would make it today. So just really quickly, communist ideas have upside down reward mechanisms. Things that make small businesses great are not valued at all. Starting in our universities and elementary schools, groupthink is valued over independent thought. Every quality that defines intellectual courage, like from Martin Luther King, these are now viewed as a problem. All things progressive are rewarded. So that is new ideas like there's no such thing as gender and we have to apologize for our white privilege. These are rewarded. If you believe in equality of outcome, that is where everybody has to end up the same, no matter what your talent stack, no matter what your income level, these people receive top administrative jobs in HR hiring departments in our academic universities. Those who value equality of opportunity, or put another way, competition, right? The harder you work, the more you should get to keep and earn. These people are fired or canceled. Innovators and achievers who believe in meritocracy, that is getting ahead based on merit and integrity, that's now frowned upon. And people like, this includes entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, Tom Brady, J.K. Rowling. You probably heard of Gina Carano, right? She was in the Mandalorian show at Disney. Well, simply for tweeting out that she thought, you know, we shouldn't be valued one person above another based on race, or, geez, I'm kind of a conservative. Just for saying that, she was fired. So of course, this new list of people being canceled now includes you, the business owner. So this is really a huge topic. When I spent a lot of time in my sales and marketing, many of you have probably done similar training. You know, you realize that marketing matters. You have to bring people in, get them to focus on what matters in your business. Well, I began to see very quickly where all of these marketing tools were actually being used on every citizen of Canada, and in fact, every citizen all over the world at a much, much bigger level. So while there's hundreds and hundreds of manipulation techniques, I've just picked a few. I'm going to try and walk us through that. I tried to pick easy ones that you'll be able to spot when they happen. So manipulation, and other words for this are persuasion, hypnosis, or influence. Okay, so this is the idea that we want to encourage tunnel vision. It leaves people open to suggestion. Just like hypnosis, you can't force somebody to be hypnotized and to do something they don't want to do. However, if people aren't even aware that they're being hypnotized or influenced, this is when it's absolutely the most effective. And as long as you believe something is real and that it's real for you, well, then you assume it's real everywhere. All right, so big tech, big pharma, big governments are now using media as their tool to direct our focus. No one is immune to media manipulation. And if you don't believe me, well, check this out. So most of you are probably aware of this idea, right? Our emotions have a huge effect on our decisions. If any of you have kids, you know what it's like when your kids are emotional and their ability to think when they're angry or upset versus when they're calm. Well, adults are no different. So sales and marketing relies on this fact to make a sale, but the media and government rely on this fact to also change your mind and to get you to follow their narrative. Most people think that, especially as you grow into adulthood, that we become rational, we weigh all our decisions on information, but the reality is there's simply too much information out there and we actually act on emotion. So here's some common examples. I'm going to show you a number of images and I want you to just think what emotion comes to mind first, and then maybe see if you can guess the product that they're trying to sell. So here's a common one: young kid partying, having a good time. Well, of course, that's Coca-Cola. Here's a good-looking young lady, and the ad says it's selling low-carb bars, but really there's other emotions that are being sold at the same time. Likewise, for men, you'll see an image something like this, always behind men's deodorant, hair care products, shaving products. Here's one: carefree, happy family on the beach. Hotel chains. And this one, happy, carefree family. This one's used for banks. I've also seen this one recently on the wall of Shoppers Drug Mart. Here's a good little one. This one makes me smile. This is used in 2 different insurance companies. And then any guesses what this one's for? Happy mama, happy baby. Of course, we want that happy emotion to be associated with vaccines. And here's one that has become all too common every day in the last 10 months. And of course, this image has been frequently associated with COVID. So the next one I want to take a look at, in addition to emotions, is this idea of priming. So priming you've heard of, like I prime my kids when it's bedtime, get your pajamas on, brush your teeth. Of course, there's primary school, which primes you for the rest of your academic career. So here's an example of how priming works. I want everyone in the audience to take a second and tell me what color comes to mind when I say the letter A. And if you are like 95% of the rest of people, you answered red. So that might not seem like a big deal, but there's something super deep and fundamental that's going on that leads you to that answer. So red, we tend to think of red because A goes with apple. And of course, when you're in kindergarten, as you're learning your alphabet, you're also learning all the colors of the rainbow, and red comes first. So that seed was first planted in most of us when we were 5 years old. Steve Jobs, one of the most amazing marketing experts ever in the world, he understood this. So he wanted that fundamental image, right, of an apple to be associated with his product. Another example of how powerful this association is there's this cool experiment where they repeated it multiple times. 2 classrooms, 2 separate groups of people. In one room, an apple was sitting on the desk. In the other room, a little piece of paper that said IBM was in there. Well, time after time, with like 99% accuracy, anytime those people had to write a quick little quiz or a test, those people with the apple in the room performed better every time. Absolutely incredible. And they know now that this has this idea to do with priming, where apples are associated with the classroom, with iPads, with computers. And that gets our brain ready to write a quiz. So priming, a quick example of where else this plays out. What images come to your mind when you hear the word COVID-19? So again, if you're like most people, now that 10 months have gone by, it's going to be things like this: virus, infectious disease, stay home, danger. And that is no accident. All of these emotions of fear, they get heightened in the limbic part of our brain, that sort of lizard part of our brain. And of course, just like we talked about earlier, once emotion is heightened, ability to use your cognitive abilities or to weigh information, that goes down. So of course, while we're primed and alert for danger, it makes sense that we should close down our businesses. Okay, so priming always prepares us for what's next. So something to keep in mind is the next phase, of course, how are we going to defeat viruses and diseases, and how are we going to stop from being closed and open up again? Well, of course, the only way is to defeat that virus, and that is to prepare us to get ready for this idea of mandatory vaccines. Okay, framing. This is the third example that I want to run you through really quickly. Framing, here's one quick example. If you have two products, absolutely identical ingredients. On one label, 5% of germs survive. On the other label, kills 95% of germs. Same product, different wording. Which one do you choose? If you're like 99% of people, kill germs every time. So again, when we want people to choose one product over another, it's very important what the other item is that we compare it to. If we want people to shut down their business, take a loss on their income, possibly go bankrupt, there's only one thing that's going to supersede that need of people. And of course, that's the idea of death. So you'll notice in the news, there's been a lot of talk, at first anyways, of deaths from COVID, danger and deaths. So in terms of framing, what I want to do is to give you a different thing to frame business shutdown against. Here's a chart of the overall death rates in Canada from September 2016 to August 2020. August 2020, once we started to get that, we've had by that point about 10 months of the virus all around the world. Okay, so on the left side of this bar, we have total deaths due to all causes per 100,000 people. And along the bottom, you can see that the first set of 4 bars is talking about Canada. From 2016 to 2017 in Canada, we saw that there was almost 800,000 deaths every year. That number stayed almost the same. So even though in 2016-17, we had about 800,000 deaths total in Canada, 4 years later, despite a world pandemic with all this talk of deaths, you can see that the death rate is almost exactly the same. And that's true of Ontario, Quebec, Western Canada, Atlantic Canada, and Northern Canada. Here's another comparison to look at. If you look at the circle in yellow, we see COVID-19 related deaths. And that's all we've been hearing about in the news. It seems to be our #1 fear or #1 cause of death. And yet, if you compare it to pneumonia and the flu, very similar. If we compare it to heart disease, obviously heart disease, malignant tumors, all other causes of death, these things are still our #1 killer. COVID is still very, very small. So again, this idea of framing. We keep hearing about cases. Cases are up. Of course, we have to stay closed. But I want you to consider that in addition to COVID cases going up, nobody's talking about the fact that in the last year, we've seen suicide deaths go up 4 times. Okay, the CDC has also reported that the youngest people are suffering the most. We're seeing increased rates of anxiety, depression. My firefighter friends, in addition to statistics, my firefighter friends have said in these last 4 months, I'm going to cry here because in these last 4 months, they have responded to more calls of suicide of 9 and 10-year-old children than they have seen in their entire career. And this, of course, is a result of parents keeping their children home, thinking that they're doing the right thing by keeping them safe. Okay, another example here, conformity. Conformity is our tendency to align our behavior with those around us. Everybody knows the urge to fit in. It served a good evolutionary value, right? It keeps us safe from predators. But it's also really important to realize that this compulsion to conform, it may give us short-term gain, but we really have to look at what are the long-term effects of that. Most agreeable people, right, they don't want to stand out, they don't want to offend anybody, so it's far, far easier to just do the right thing, just wear the mask, just close the business, and to stay out of trouble. So we tend to see agreeable people, open people, tend to be the first to go along with new rules and regulations, and of course, uninformed people, because they simply don't realize that dissent is even possible. Conformity, when motivated by deference for authority, can be very, very harmful. A lot of leaders of various communist regimes, Hitler, he was well aware that the fear of being ostracized was even stronger than the fear of death. And so, of course, this was used to get people to comply, to give up their Jewish neighbors. As long as they were in that in-group, they didn't want to be associated with the bad group. In Hitler's case, it's Jewish people. In our case today, it's anti-masker people, anti-vaxxer people. Cancel culture is one of the most powerful communist tools for ensuring conformity. Okay, so here's an interesting chart. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of it, but we'll attach it so you guys can take a better look. On the left-hand side, this is a well-known chart of coercion. Okay, it's been used by every communist regime, and it has been studied, and this is the best of the best. You want to open a communist regime, follow these ones. On the right-hand side of the screen, of course, you can see where these techniques are being used in this lockdown campaign. Okay, so in the yellow circle, if we look at monopolization of perception, we need to fix all the victims' attention on the immediate predicament. Do not let them focus on anything else. Frustrate any action they try to do that does not comply. Eliminate any stimulus coming from outside opinions or outside sources. Make sure that the person in charge controls the narrative. And of course, we're seeing that same thing happen with the lockdown media coverage. Here's a few more examples. A good way to ensure compliance and control is to induce debility, make people exhausted. You weaken their mental and physical ability to resist. What's a great way to do that? Make sure your kids don't go to school. Make sure you're now worried about trying to comply with the 100 different laws that are constantly changing. They know that we become worn out by tension and fear. Compare that to the lockdown narrative. Okay, one more example to look at. Demonstrate your absolute omnipotence. If you're an authority, you need people to obey, you make sure that people are scared to do otherwise. So you need to demonstrate there is no ability to resist. You resist, we fine you, we ticket you, we shame you with other people. You need to constantly show who's in charge. And of course, one of the worst, most ugly sides is provide positive motivation for compliance. So I've noticed that a lot of people have sort of self-deputized themselves and have taken it upon themselves to be the police. If you're not wearing a mask, or you're not standing in that little box, or you're not the right distance apart, now you can point a finger and yell at that person. My own son, he has autism. He has a hard time with the mask. So sometimes he pulls it out a little bit to breathe or has it down. Well, he's now surrounded by teachers and kids screaming at him. You're gonna kill grandma. It works. It's pretty darn effective. All right, last two. Something to focus on is this idea of thinking past the sale. That is to focus on the end result, the product you want your client to buy. This is a very effective way of blinding you to any other alternative. So in other words, completely done deal. So here's a question. There's a lot of high-level professionals in this room, and if I was to combine all the years of experience and intellect, I know for a fact it's very, very high. So how many people in this room were approached by any government official, any health officer, asking them, how do you as small businesses think that we should navigate this lockdown or this virus? Anybody? Yeah, exactly. So just understand this is a very powerful technique. They don't want you to question the fact that there is a virus, that locking down is the best solution. That's why you were never asked. Instead, you were inundated with this term new normal. By June, everybody had heard it at least once. Here's what's interesting. I accidentally wrote on 2019 here, but in 2017, the term new normal was first released from accidentally leaked from a UN document. Okay, so new normal. Another question for everybody, when exactly did this become normal? Or this? I sent my daughter to a drop-in at gymnastics, and without telling her what they were doing, they put this thing up to her head. All right, and another important one that of course applies to business owners is this idea of commitment and consistency. Small business owners, more than most, really care about this, right? People value qualities of reliability, trustworthiness. You want to be someone you can count on. And of course, we want our behavior to match our own values and our own self-image. Here's how this is being used against us. Okay, so marketers and military experts know that people always use their past decisions as a reference for what they will choose in the future. So I'm going to give you the most common patented textbook example. We have two neighborhoods. One neighborhood, they were both about 10 blocks apart, same socioeconomic status. In one neighborhood, people said, no way, I do not want a lawn sign saying to drive safe. In the other neighborhood, 10 blocks away, 4 times as many people said, yeah, sure, I'll put that lawn sign in my lawn. The only difference, 10 days earlier, that very willing neighborhood was asked to put a teeny tiny postcard in their window saying, drive safely. So here's an example of how that same tactic is being used today. Everybody remember this from 9 months ago? Oh, we're just going to flatten the curve. Just shut everything down for a tiny amount of time. Then we'll get back. When did we go from this to this? Full lockdown with talk of another 3 years of lockdown. Not since the Second World War has our federal government restricted the freedom of Canadians to work, to enter and leave their own country, nor have provinces imposed bans on interprovincial travel. That's an example of the powerful tool of commitment and consistency. So tobacco companies, this is kind of a historical example where we've seen this work very well. For those of you who are old enough to remember, I remember being like 6 years old and swimming in pools and pools of smoke. We were all told cigarettes were safe. And of course, we know the reality today is very different. And yet in the 1990s, those of you who are watching TV will remember, these are all the presidents of the major American tobacco companies. They stood before the Senate and said, absolutely not, cigarettes are not addictive. No, they do not cause cancer. How in the world were they able to do this when scientists and other leading experts said otherwise? So here's the key. They knew that they had to pay high-level PR firms to deceive the public, to run vicious discrediting campaigns against journalists who knew cigarettes were bad, against scientists who told the truth about the dangers of cigarettes. They paid politicians, they paid scientists, and they paid influential celebrities and journalists, as well as health agencies. They did it with the GMOs. Oh, no, new grain products. We don't use any pesticides. Those don't cause cancer. GMOs are totally healthy. And again, the leaders of Monsanto testified before the Senate, we don't use pesticides, they don't cause cancer. Well, they were wrong. Bayer was sued for billions and billions of dollars based on that lie once it came to light. So we know that behind the American tobacco industry, we had Hills and Knowlton. That's the PR firm that shot them to the top and generated billions of dollars of profit. We know behind the Bayer Monsanto company, we had the Ketchum group. Well, now there's a new group in town. This one's called Publicis. And here's a quick overview of what they're in charge of. The Publicis group, which probably nobody here has heard of, but a quick Google search will reveal, they own and control NewsGuard. Guess what NewsGuard does? They decide what reports, what scientific studies can be published, and which ones can be censored. Which journalists can talk about stories and which journalists can't. Publicis Group works with and has shares in the World Economic Forum. For those of you who don't know Klaus Schwab, he's a good guy that you're going to have to get to know real fast. He's in charge of the global reset. Publicis Group also works for, has shares in Microsoft, and they work very closely with Bill Gates. They also represent the World Health Organization. They represent the US Department of Defense, which has since said anybody who does not fully agree that 100% mask compliance and vaccine compliance, if you don't agree with those things, you are a national terrorist threat. That means me with my son who doesn't want to wear a mask. That's right, I'm a threat to the United States of America. And of course, Publicis Group holds controlling shares in every major vaccine company. So now I hope you can begin to see where all of these marketing strategies are being used and implemented incredibly effectively by big pharma, big tech, big banks, and big government. And a little bit later, Tanya's going to explain how this relationship ties in. It's now glaringly obvious to a growing number of people in the medical profession and business professionals that anyone refusing to conform has now been marked for cancellation. Pay attention from now on how many headlines from your provincial health officer and news stations are going to include a number, the ones we covered, plus a number more of manipulation techniques that are used to disempower you. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. So it's our hope today that they won't fool you anymore, and you'll be able to share this info and explain it to other business owners as well. So just a quick example of framing. Anytime from now on, you're going to see vaccine ads will only be framed or put against positive images. These are the more positive messages we see, but here's something we want to leave you with. Okay, what exactly is social about distancing? Wearing a mask. How many people here have seen people in the car by themselves with a mask, or cuddling their baby with a mask? Or worse, like my own mom, haven't seen their grandchildren in 4 months. Stay safe in the middle of a beach. Okay. Here's another interesting thing. China, the place where the virus first came from, well, this is what it looks like now in 2021. They're back and open. Isn't that interesting? And we're all in this together. See the posters? Well, I'd like to ask, we're in what together? What exactly are we in? All right, so with that, I'm going to hand you over to the co-founder of Action4Canada. And I think he does a better job of giving his background, but very intelligent man, and I've learned so very, very much from him. Mac Rogerson is here to walk you through our Constitution and our rights and how those rights apply to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Denise. Great job on presenting the information. Again, yeah, I'm a founder for Action4Canada. I co-founded this with Tanya Gaw. I spent most of my early part of my life in careers such as business, hospitality, construction, and after returning to academia, human resources, industrial relations, And I've worked in contract law, collective agreement administration, employment and human rights law, charter rights and freedoms, and labor law. And my disclaimer is I'm not a lawyer, but I'm educated to know when to call the lawyers. And so, as you can understand, Action4Canada has decided to call the top constitutional lawyer in with regard to what's happening with these COVID measures. So Denise, what I'll do is I'll just get you to start going through the slides, but just do one at a time if you don't mind. So we'll go on to the next slide, but you can see here that you know, businesses are being permanently closed and bankruptcies are rising. Businesses are being severely affected, and we all know that businesses play a key role in the economic engine of Canada. So we're here to love on you, and to, by doing so, we're trying to give you some information that empowers you. To Denise's point, we really want you to understand what your legal rights are and how you can use those legal rights. Go on to the next slide. So as you can see, a number of businesses have been affected. And actually this number where it says pandemic could kill 1 to 5 small businesses, that's now 1 in 8, 1 in 5, 1 in 4. That number keeps growing. So if we look at small business, hospitality, marketing, tourism, they all face possible closures. Go on to the next slide. And this comes directly from, you know, the Canadian Federation of Businesses, independent businesses. Could result in 2.4 million job losses across Canada as a result of the second wave of lockdowns, on top of the 58,000 that have already been lost. And I've seen numbers as high as 100,000 businesses will probably never reopen. Go on to the next slide. So this is very disheartening for most Canadians, and especially those people that are in business. You know, a little bit about Ontario, what's been happening, you know, 153,000 jobs lost in January as government considers extending the stay-at-home order. And what we're seeing with these stay-at-home orders is they keep moving the goalposts. You know, once a business figures out that they've got the rules figured out, they move the goalpost again. So go on to the next slide. Every business is essential. All right, this is the point we want to drive home. There is no business that is not essential, because your business is essential for the family and income it provides for your family and your family's survival. At the same time, governments may extend these stay-at-home orders, right? They keep talking about it. They'll talk about maybe opening up, and then right away they'll say, oh, but if cases rise, we might close them again. Again, moving those goalposts. You know, the governments continue to ratchet up fear, and they constantly change the rules, constantly. Next slide. You know, Doug Ford's cabinet right here in Ontario, he's stated over and over again, you know, as of February 16th across Ontario, you know, while pushing that up additional 2 weeks, saying, you know, we're going to close for a bit, but then maybe we might extend that out 2 more weeks. You know, it's just another example of how they're framing this constant fear, constant fear. Go on to the next slide. Small business owners and their employees have been devastated by closures. Well, their big box competition has held near monopolies on the economy. Small business employed some 88% of the Ontarians before the pandemic, and we can't afford to lose them. And this is from another leader, Del DeLuca. And people have to understand that your small business has been closed in favor of large corporations who have made almost double their regular normal revenue numbers. On to the next slide. Fentanyl deaths are rising. You know, addictions are going crazy. People are taking overdoses. The death by overdose has risen exponentially since these lockdowns began. Next slide. We're just trying to give you a picture of what's going on. You know, and then with the lockdowns, they started quarantining people, re-entering the country at airports. Here's a lady whose child who was flying in from Arizona was taken and quarantined, not allowed to call the parents, no contact. They don't know where the child was taken. This woman is terrified. And who wouldn't be in this situation? The other scary part that I have to bring to your attention is these surveys. And these surveys are by design to get a certain outcome. And the shocking new poll from the Toronto Star really puts it out there. 47% of people believe that police should be allowed to enter a home or business without a warrant. 71% believe in jailing and fining those people that don't cooperate with COVID measures. 37% believe in breaking up families if they don't cooperate with COVID measures. 37% believe in contact tracing. And I've got personal experience with contact tracing. 30% believe in suspending our civil liberties. This is pretty scary because when people are willing to give up freedom because they figure they're going to get a little bit of safety and security in return, this is precisely what the government wants. They want you to give up your freedoms. They want you to walk away from your freedoms just so you can get a little sense of safety and security. Go on to the next slide. And this is all about framing. But we have a little document here. It's actually a rather large document called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. And this document lays out your fundamental rights and your guaranteed rights and freedoms. So your fundamental freedoms are one thing, but your guaranteed rights are rights under the law. And even the emergency COVID measures preamble state that the COVID measures cannot violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the reason they state that is it's unlawful for them to violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but they're doing it. Go on to the next slide. So the Emergency Act states clearly that the orders cannot and do not supersede the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights. I'm not going to read every slide, but you can just get an idea of what's going on. And we have international covenants on our legal and civil and political rights, particularly in respect to those fundamental rights. They're not limited or abridged, even in a national emergency. You can go on to the next slide. And we're actually questioning now whether the provinces actually have jurisdiction over this, just so you know, because national emergencies are just that, national emergencies. They're supposed to be managed by the national government, not by provinces. So under Section 1 of the Constitution are the values and principles of which guide the court in applying Section 1. Include inherent dignity of the human person, commitment to social justice and equality, accommodation for a wide variety of beliefs, respect for cultural and group identity, the faith in social and political institutions which enhance the participation of individuals and groups in society. Next slide. Next slide. So Section 2 is very, very important because it lays out what your fundamental freedoms are. Freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. Excuse me. Freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of association. Next slide. Next slide. Section 7, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof. Section 8, everyone has the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. This is important. Everyone has the right not to be arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. And we're seeing these rights being violated every day. Next slide. So these rights are provided for you under the Constitution Act of 1867, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms Act 1982. These are your fundamental and guaranteed rights as a Canadian citizen. Next slide. That means if any government legislation, rules, regulations, and/or policy violates any of these rights, the courts and tribunals must hear your complaint or your case. And most people don't even realize, but the United Nations is writing all the government policy for the municipal, provincial, and federal level with regard to COVID measures, COVID emergency measures. I'm not sure about you, but in the last election, I didn't vote for the UN to write policy here in Canada. I voted for actually a different party than the one was elected to represent me. So obviously our governments are no longer representing us. Next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about the Canadian Human Rights Act, but I'm just going to point out some very very important, potent elements of the Human Rights Act. And one is the discriminatory practice, all right, of denying people entry to such businesses or accommodation. All right, and the reason I'm talking about this, you can go on to the next slide, is if we differentiate between a person based on disability, we can be subject to a human rights complaint. And the reason I bring this to your attention is a lot of health units across provinces and across Canada have given exemptions for people with disabilities about wearing masks. And what we're seeing is businesses have become policing, and the businesses are policing those people wearing masks. You cannot prevent a person with a mask exemption from entering your business and doing business with you. All right, it's very, very important. Next slide. So this is a section out of the Ontario government's website on face covering and face masks. And I want to point some interesting information out to you. The best way to stop spread of COVID-19 or coronavirus is by staying home and avoiding close contact with others outside your household. This message keeps getting repeated all the time, all the time. When you go out, you must wear a face covering, non-medicinal mask, or such as a cloth mask in indoor spaces, whenever physical distancing is a challenge. This includes public spaces, for example, inside stores, event spaces, entertainment facilities, common areas, hotels, churches, and places of worship. Workplaces, even that are not open to the public, vehicles that operate as part of a business or organization. And right at the very end of this section on the website, it says, face coverings will not stop you from getting COVID-19, but may help others. Now listen to what this says. How is it going to help others if it doesn't stop the spread of COVID-19? I'm just going to leave that with you. So this is the exemption here, and this is why it's very important to understand it, okay? This is right from the website. If they have a medical condition that inhibits their ability to wear a face covering or is unable to put or remove the mask or face covering without the help of someone else, or are being accommodated in according with the Accessibility for Ontario's with the Disability Act or the Human Rights Code. And this is why you want to be careful that you're not, you know, imposing masking on everyone enters the store. Because if someone has an exemption, you got to honor that exemption. And it's illegal for it to ask for a copy of that exemption. That becomes a Privacy of Information Act or medical privacy violation. Next slide. And this is an example of a local poster that gets posted here in the Thunder Bay area where I am. And if you look right here at the very bottom of the poster, just above the black bar, there's text that you can barely read. And what I've done is I put that text next to the poster on the slide. And these are the exemptions that we discussed. But you notice how small they made it, and then how large they made mask or face covering required. And that's all people read. And what the text basically states is proof of exemption is not required. All right, next slide. So this is the big iceberg, and this is what you need to know, right? What we see, what's explicit, what's unseen, or what's tacit. So municipalities, provinces, and federal government can pass legislation or laws that violate your guaranteed constitutional rights and freedoms and civil liberties. They can do that. Unless it's challenged in courts, these laws remain unchanged. And that brings us to tacit agreement. And I really want you to understand this because this is really important. An example of tacit agreement, if you don't know, and I'm going to explain to you, is when you were all getting smart meters on your home. And this was to help you with time of use energy usage in your home. All right, you got a notice identifying that the smart meter would be installed, that your old meter would be replaced. And it said, another line on the bottom of that notice, it would say something like this. If you have any concerns or you do not want this meter, please contact us. If you fail to contact us, this meter will be installed on such and such a date. So this is what tacit agreement is. Your silence becomes your consent. All right. And this is what the government is using now when they pass laws, is your silence becomes consent, because they're passing laws, they're passing regulations, they're passing legislation that violates your rights. And if you don't speak up, you're agreeing to it. It's tacit agreement. So right now your business is open to the public under the law. That's called open invitation. Your space is not private property. It now becomes public space as legally recognized in open invitation. When you put an open sign up, you're inviting people in. All right. The other piece that I really want you to pay attention to is is the silencing of anybody who speaks out against what's happening, right? They become conspiracy theorists. They're labeled, another label. And it's all part of that culture of conformity and cancel culture, right? And this is what's ongoing. People have to realize that this is what's happening. And if you do speak up, then you're canceled, or you're called a conspiracy theorist, or you're called a racist, or it's our favorite term from our government these days. Next slide. So what options does a business owner have? Right now, your business is open to the public and under law. It's called open invitation. So that's what most businesses operate under. It's a public, becomes a public space, and this is, the current state of most businesses in Canada. Next slide. So there's a couple of options you have here, and this is more just to stop health officers or stop police from entering your business. And you would post a no trespassing sign at your driveway or at the entrance of your parking lot, and again on your door. And what this does is it just limits who's going to be allowed in, right? And I'm not here to tell you that this sign is going to stop you from getting charged, because it won't. But it'll stop them from walking into your business and collecting evidence or placing you under suspicion. All right, and you're seeing this happen in a lot of businesses. What they're doing is they're posting guards at the door, and they're not allowing people in who they don't want in their businesses. And where this really becomes applicable, and we've been following this across the United States, is different types of businesses like gymnasiums, massage therapy clinics, different types of clinics, okay? Different things where people can become members versus customers in open invitation. It creates a private members club. It's private, it's not public, it's behind a closed door. They cover their windows so people can't look in, and they carry on their business, and they place a guard at the door, right? It's a private members club. Now, this doesn't apply to every business, but it's an option that you can choose to do. And we've seen other options come up in the news media. There's a lady down in Southern Ontario. She changed her hair salon because of a loophole. Her hair salon became a movie studio, right? She was still cutting hair, but she rejigged it and renamed it a production studio. Next slide. So there's a few resources that we can provide for you. There's a BitChute video that's very important that Rebel Media's put up by a business person right in Southern Ontario. And then, of course, there's a CFIB link about businesses being shut down. And there's a legal swipe app, but it only works on Apple phones, and it's only available on the App Store. I've used that for years, but what it does is it lays out what your rights are, and it can even connect you to a lawyer by pressing a button, as long as you program that phone number in there and your legal advisor in there. It'll do all of that for you. Next slide. So our legal action, what we've done here is we've retained a top constitutional lawyer in Canada for a constitutional challenge of the emergency measures in British Columbia and federally against the federal government. All right, and so LAWCO also represents a partner of ours that we work with, is Vaccination Choice Canada, who has already filed a statement of claim in Ontario and against the federal government as well. So in an effort to unite Canadian small businesses, we suggest they associate in larger groups or associations and federations, and they immediately take action. All right, we have a couple of very effective programs that we're running right now. They're campaigns. We have one's called Boots on the Ground campaign. And those volunteers are going around educating businesses on what their rights are. You may get one showing up at your door, because we've had such a success with these in British Columbia. We're rolling these out across Canada. So the reason you want to associate or unionize or become a federation is this enables your group to become a lobby and lobby governments. And you could retain lawyers as a group and have legal representation. So what you really want to do here is you want to find out what works for you. All right. Now, if you're a group of restaurants, we're seeing restaurants around the world cooperate and work in associations. We're seeing it in Minnesota, just a state across from me. I'm about 20 kilometers from the Minnesota border, and we've seen a lot of businesses in Minnesota associate, especially restaurants. Next slide. So the next step here is we want to talk to you about legal interactions, and those interactions with a police officer. We have a retired police officer named Vincent Gerses. He's a 32-year veteran of the Ontario Provincial Police. And Vincent's going to talk to you about police interactions, fines, courts, and so on. And he's going to empower you with that information. So with that, I will turn this over to Vincent right here. And thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been very informative for you.
Video and audio would be the best. So just let them know that when they do speak to you, that you have every intention to exercise your charter rights. Just say, you know, I'm exercising my rights. That's all you have to say. You don't have to get into the whole definition of the paragraph that's written here. And tell them who you are up front. My name is so-and-so. I'm the owner of this establishment. Just let them know that they're dealing with the owner. Tell them right up front what your name is. You have nothing to hide there. You do have a right to remain silent. So at any point earlier on in the game, when you're talking to somebody who comes in who has some legal authority, ask them fairly soon in the game, am I under arrest, or is there a chance that I'm going to be arrested for something? And I would tell you right now, based on opening your business, your chance of being arrested is minuscule. Unless you've committed some criminal violation. They're not there to arrest you. They're there to probably have a look at what you're doing. And possibly if you're violating some provincial law, they're going to write you up a ticket. So they're not, for the most part, like I said, unless it's a criminal thing they're there for and you don't really know why they're there, most likely it's not going to be for an arrest. But ask them that question, because if an officer is there to arrest you and they say that it's possible, then at that point, if they're indicating an arrest is imminent, then you should not say anything and they should be providing you with your rights. But again, that is going to be a very, very rare situation. You're not, these situations that we're dealing with, these provincial issues, these legal mandates, these result in provincial fines. So don't answer any questions they put to you, and do it politely and just say, listen, I'm not being combative. I really don't feel it's necessary that I have to answer any of your questions. You can be helpful without verbally answering any questions. And you can ask them for their identification, and you can say it verbally, just repeat whatever they say in a clear voice. If you know that you have video or audio that's running, then you don't need to write it down. But if you don't have video and audio running, make sure you have a pen and a piece of paper. And as soon as they tell you their name and their badge number, write it down. That's your opportunity to write it down. So let's go to the next slide. Are we stuck?
Just a minute there, bear with me.
Okay. So again, you're not required to surrender any documentation. If they say, I want to see your driver's license, you don't have to pull out a document. You do if you're driving a motor vehicle, and driving a motor vehicle is not a right, it's a privilege. And with that privilege comes having to surrender certain documents. But if you're in your business, you don't have to surrender those documents, but you will have to, under certain legal conditions, provide your name. So provide your name to the officer if you're asked, and that's just a polite thing to do. But you don't need to dig in your pocket. They're going to probably ask you for your driver's license or some form of proof of your identification. You're not required to do that. You're required to, if they're there for a legal reason, just provide your name. So if you ask them if you're being detained or under arrest, I already went through that. And also state to the officer that you wish to have no further communications if things start to go bad. And as soon as they indicate that they're going to be laying charges, then just make it clear that you don't want to have any further conversation. Okay, off to the next slide. Okay. So if the officer persists, you can ask them to leave the property. And if they don't comply, you can tell them they are subject to a trespassing charge. Good luck with laying that charge. I don't think that's going to happen. But again, if you need to, step away from the conversation and stand your ground. So we can go to the next slide, and I'll say that if an officer is preparing a charge and he's going to give it to you, he or she is going to provide you with a charge, maintain composure and be respectful. And always be respectful and be the better person if things start to go sour, because you can never go wrong or dig a deeper hole or get into a further problem by being polite and being considerate and being a respectful person. Worst thing you could do is lose your cool, because when you lose your cool, you become emotional. And when you're emotional, you don't think straight. And you can do something that you're really going to regret. And that being, you're going to give the officer an opportunity to possibly lay some criminal charges against you if you lose your cool. So stay composed. And if you think you're going to lose your cool, turn the whole conversation over to somebody else that you can designate that to say, listen, I really can't talk right now. I'm too upset. Here, you deal with my number two person or whatever, and put it off to somebody else. Most problems and dispute that lead to compounding problems are going to happen because people lose their cool. So don't lose their cool. But saying that, on the other side, police officers don't like to be questioned. They don't like to have their authority questioned. And but part of what they do need to understand, and they need to do, and that's why they get paid the big bucks, is they need to maintain composure. If you see an officer lose their cool, that's not a good thing. That's a very, very unprofessional thing. And I would seriously question any officer that loses their cool in the line of duty when interacting with somebody. Police need to develop a thick skin and be prepared for that. Again, that's why they get paid the big bucks. So always be respectful when you receive your ticket. And when you do get a ticket, don't throw it in the garbage. Don't throw it on the floor. Don't roll it up in a ball and throw it away and say it's just a useless piece of paper. Once you're handed that, you are responsible to deal with that. And I have every belief that taking that ticket before the courts and dealing with it will result in a favorable outcome for you. And I'll get into that in a few minutes, but don't throw it away, because once it's issued, the ball is in your park to deal with it. So just check off the section on the back of the ticket that indicates you wish to dispute it and deal with it, and make copies of it, create a folder. So while this is all happening, once you're done your interactions with the officer, it's really important that you make notes. Police officers make notes, and you're, as an involved person in this, who is probably going to end up wanting to say things at court somewhere down the road, way down the road, you may want to be, you want to make reference to the notes that you made. So if you make notes immediately following the incident dealing with the officer, if you make notes and review, if you can, review any audio recording and video prior to making your notes, just to refresh your memory on exactly what it was that happened. When you make those notes, you will be allowed to use those notes in the future in defending yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody does that. So as long as you've done it immediately following the issue, and then when you're done, sign them, sign the notes, sign every page of the notes that you make. And those are yours. Put them in a file, make sure you don't lose them, and refer to them in the future. If somebody said something, whoever was saying something, make note on your notes that officer so-and-so made this comment and another officer made that comment. So it's very important to remember what was said and who said it. Also, just make sure you keep a file somewhere and don't lose it. And you may have to actually develop several files, because this probably isn't going to be a one ticket thing for you. It's probably going to become, over the period of time, it's going to become multiple tickets. And I'm familiar with certain people who have, stacks of tickets. And quite frankly, I don't think they're at all worth the paper that they're written on. So let's go to the next page. Next slide. Okay, so when it comes to court time, right now courts are closed. So any court dealings that you're going to have are going to be through a Zoom court or an online process. And the experiences in BC, Alberta, and Ontario right now is that there doesn't seem to be any trial tickets that are, any convictions that are happening. Quite frankly, from all the conversations I've had, it appears that either they can't find any registration of the ticket or charge, so there's no charge before the court, surprisingly, or there are many cases of let's make a deal. You know, it's a $2,000 fine, but today we're going to offer you this deal of $300 and we'll just call it a day. So if it was me, I wouldn't accept a $300 deal. I would accept a $0 make this gone deal. And then we'll probably be talking about things that you can do to retaliate against these nonsense charges, but it's just something you should consider. However, I personally would not accept any deal. Your rights have been violated. If this is, we're talking about the store-related issues of anything in any charge dealing with a violation of your rights is it's going to go out the window. So I would not be dealing anything. Now, another threat that the courts make to you is, well, if you want a trial, if you're not going to deal today, we're going to have to put this over to trial. And you're not going to get to this for at least 18 months because our courts are booked solid. Well, there's something called the Askoff decision, and it was decided upon by the Supreme Court, is just what is a reasonable delay in time in dealing with your charge. And the courts ruled somewhere between 8 to 10 months, depending on a lot of things, but somewhere between 8 to 10 months was the maximum acceptable limit for your having your trial. So if the courts are going to say, well, it's going to be 18 months before we get to deal with your case, you'll really have no say in that, and there's nothing you can do about it. Just voice your objection to that and say, well, I really don't want to wait 18 months, but if that's what it's going to take, that's not from my doing, that's the court's doing, and I'm willing to wait 18 months. Actually, don't say that, sorry. You're not willing to wait 18 months. You're saying, I don't want to wait 18 months, but if you're making me wait that unnecessary delay, I guess I will. So we're just going to have to wait, because that becomes another constitutional argument. The argument that constitutionally you should have your trial within 10 months, 8 to 10 months. So, you know, just more advantageous to your fines. And I suspect that this, the prosecutors are probably looking to do this, because then they'll just be able to throw your case out the window and say, well, we threw it out the window because of the delay issue, not because we were doing anything wrong in laying the charges, but because of the delay, we'll let this one go. They don't want to deal with these cases. These are all unconstitutional. You know, they're as it says here, the fines are deterrent purposes designed to further instill fear. So if you're arrested, and I suspect that there is a extreme high unlikelihood of any arrest, because we're not dealing with arrest offenses unless you lose your cool or there are other issues that come into play. But if there's ever something that is going to deal with an arrest and something goes bad, just remember that you do have access to a lawyer of your choice. That is, if you provide the phone number and say, this is the lawyer I want to talk to, here's his number, please call him for me. Otherwise, you'll be given access to a free legal aid lawyer as soon as possible, right after your arrest. So when you're provided access to a lawyer, you also have to be given a private location that allows you to have conversation with your lawyer in a confidential manner. And then following that conversation with your lawyer, when you're going to go back into the police, again, don't say anything if you're ever taken into police custody. It's never advisable to speak to any issues when you're in custody. Just maintain your silence is always the way to go. Next page, next slide. Okay, so under basic human rights, the issue that is not covered on the slide and something I'd like to talk about is the multiple layers of protection that we have. Many people think that our charter rights are gone out the window and we don't have any rights anymore based on what you're seeing. And it certainly appears that way, but I'm going to tell you that's not true. We still have our rights. Currently, we still have our rights. And I'm going to take you through that a little bit. Since World War II, the war was over in 1945, but there was a final battle, and that final battle took place in 1946, and it was known as the Nuremberg Trials. And at the Nuremberg Trials, what was repeated and echoed over and over again was, never again, never again would these atrocities be allowed to happen. And so as a result of the never again, in 1948, the United Nations had come up with a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if you're looking at this picture, and I hope you can all see it, take a look at all these shields. If you see these shields, imagine them all stacked one in front of another. And these are the shields that we have as citizens in this country to protect us from this BS that's happening right now. And the first shield I'm going to say, and there are many more shields, but I'm only going through a few. The first would be that Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The next shield would be the Canadian Bill of Rights in 1960. And then comes the Canadian Charter of Rights in 1982. 3 layers of steel to protect our citizens' human rights. After that comes the Federal Emergency Measures Act, another defensive shield. In Ontario, the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act of 2006, another shield, another Spartan shield. The Police Services Act of Ontario, another defensive shield. And you know what all these acts that I'm telling you say? They all say the same thing. They all say, pursuant to the Canadian Charter of Rights. It's all about the Charter of Rights, the Universal Declaration of Rights, the Bill of Rights. There's layer upon layer, like an onion, there's layer upon layer of rights and protections offered to you. And the last one that I like to refer to is the police officer's oath. And before they hand a police officer a badge, they make that officer take an oath. And usually, still to this day, the officers take the oath by putting their hands on a Bible that is issued to them by the department. And they make an oath. And in Ontario, of course, the oath includes the promise to protect the Constitution of Canada, of which the Canadian Charter of Rights is a part of. So how in the hell did we get to this point with all those multiple layers of shielding and rights? How did we get to this point where your stores are closed, you can't be together with your family, and it seems like most of our rights have been taken away from us? Remember, all of these rights, they're all words on paper until strong men and women put into action in a lawful method. I'm sometimes at a loss to believe myself that we're in this situation. And I've always identified police as the guardians of the fabric of our society. And quite frankly, I'm very let down at this point. And I see a lot of subversion that has taken place within our society to get us to this point. The rights that I have just outlined, they are not gone. They are still there, but they are being subverted. And I have a lot of faith in our judicial system that when these charges, when these useless pieces of paper get to the courts, that they will not only be dealt with accordingly as they should, but there will be some recourse for everybody who had to endure this nonsense. So there is no legal authority to close your business, your church, or to violate your rights, period. And tickets can legally, but not lawfully, be issued. And I'm going to explain that. So I suggest everyone fight every charge. Okay, if we can go to the last slide. So I just want to touch on the difference between legal and lawful. And this is something that really bothers me. And I find it very interesting to see how we kind of got into this mess. So I'll just do a little bit of explanation. Some people think that these mandates that are coming out by the provinces for lockdowns and the COVID laws, we'll call them, that they're illegal. They are not illegal, and I have no idea how, but it is possible for provincial governments to actually create laws that are in conflict with all of our charter rights. So these mandates that have come out are legal, but I don't believe they're lawful. And I'll tell you what the difference is. And it's the same as the difference between obedience and morality. Legal on the left, they want you to comply and be obedient, and morality on the right. So the term lawful is legal with an ethical and moral value associated to it. So legal would be the substance of the law, while lawful is the form of the law, the shape of the law, and the character of the law. Legal could be seen as exterior, the way one man would look at another man and see you on the exterior. It doesn't really say much about the man, does it? But the interior, the lawful, would be the way God sees a man, looking at your heart and your morals and your character. That's why the medical mandates would be recognized as legal, but our human rights, our fundamental human rights, are lawful. And the main difference that I can tell you between medical mandates, provincial mandates that have just come out, and our human rights is one of those is not only lawful, it has stood the test of time. It is time proven for much longer than I have stated, because it goes back much further in history. And the shame that I feel is the term from 1946 of never again. And here we are. So I'm very proud of you all for coming and listening to this. And hopefully I've been able to shed some light on the nonsense that is before us. And I believe Rocco Galati will be speaking after me. And I have a lot of respect and admiration for Rocco. And I'd be very curious as to what he has to say. Utmost respect, Rocco.
Wow. Thank you, Vincent, for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. Your years of experience have become an asset to business owners today. Thank you so much. I'm going to cover a few critical points of interest before getting to the Q&A with Rocco Galati, our top constitutional lawyer. But first, I want to take a moment to share a recent experience which will support what Denise spoke about regarding framing and how this is actually taking place. I've spoken at several rallies recently to help bring awareness, and as a result, an investigative reporter from Global News contacted Action4Canada via email. The reporter, Stuart Bell, asked a leading question, not a generic question, but one which revealed he already had in mind what the story was going to go by. Bell wrote, I'm going to just read directly, Canadian public health officials say they are growing increasingly concerned about the prevalence of COVID-19 misinformation that is circulating. Does Action4Canada have any response to the allegation that it is involved in spreading misinformation about COVID-19 and COVID vaccines? So when we look at the framing, I have to ask, who exactly has made the allegation that Action4Canada is involved in spreading misinformation? We've not been contacted by a public health officer informing us of any such thing. I responded to Mr. Bell in a detailed letter requesting that he provide an example of Action4Canada spreading misinformation and to be sure that he back it up with evidence. Action4Canada relies on experts and peer-reviewed studies. I went on further to hold Mr. Bell accountable for not reporting the facts and for colluding with the government and feeding into the lies, the fear, and helping to facilitate the fraudulent lockdowns. As we can see, the media and the government have been working together to get citizens to hyper-focus on the 0.03% of the population that are at risk every year during influenza season, and instead treating the 99.7% as if they are merely collateral damage. For example, millions of Canadians are out of work. Over 100,000 business owners have had to permanently close their doors. Our elderly are being treated worse than convicts, isolated and dying alone. Our children are forced to wear masks and told they could cause the death of their grandparents if they do not follow the orders, despite the fact that they are at very low risk of contracting this virus and nearly 0% chance of transmitting it. This has resulted in a significant increase in depression, anxiety, and suicide amongst youth 12 to 17 years old. This is tragic. Thousands of Canadians have also died because surgeries were considered non-essential, and many more will die because of cancer. Up to 40% increase is expected in cancer deaths because people were too afraid to go to their doctor. The pastors in churches are being targeted because our country was founded on Christian principles, which are central to our freedoms and democracy. And I believe that that attack is because Christianity and the church is the only thing standing in between us and tyranny right now. So while the media is having you hyper-focus on the 0.03%, they are also covering up the real news that would put an immediate stop to the whole so-called pandemic. For instance, hydroxychloroquine, a safe and effective drug for 70 years, was discovered very early on to successfully treat the respiratory illness. And yet the Canadian government refused to make it available. And they continue to do so. Even though the American Journal has come out and recommended it, and peer-reviewed studies have shown evidence that it reduces hospitalization by 84%. I want that to sink in for a moment. Hospital reduction by 84%. We have a chart on our webpage as well, and it shows countries that made hydroxychloroquine fully available and those that prohibited it, such as Canada. And it is shocking when you see the difference in the number of deaths. The PCR test as well has been is being used by the government, and you can see here that Kerry Mullis, he's the fellow that actually invented the PCR test, and he passed away just prior to all of the COVID coming into effect. And he made it very clear that the PCR test was not effective and should never be used to treat or diagnose for COVID. But it was never called COVID at that time, but this type of viral infection. And the problem is that the PCR test in testing for other types of viruses was used at an amplification of around 24. And he had said that if the amplifications were increased, that it could find a familiar molecule in nearly every single person. The Canadian government is using this PCR test at amplification set at 35 to 45, which means that we are getting upwards of a 90% false positive rate. False positives, of course, equal increased cases. And the Canadian government is using the increased cases to maintain the ongoing lockdowns. And this is striking fear as well into Canadians so that they'll comply. The WHO has admitted that the PCR test is a problem due to the increased amplifications. And back in November, the Portuguese court ruled that the PCR tests are unreliable and the quarantines unlawful. But you don't hear Stuart Bell, an investigative reporter for Global News, reporting on this and exposing it. Nor did you probably hear that the Belarus president exposed that the IMF and World Banks tried to bribe him with nearly $1 billion US if he would implement the COVID measures. He refused. This raises serious concerns about whether or not other leaders have been offered the same deal. I personally have contacted the Assistant Commissioner McDonald, who's also head of the Federal and Crimes Division in BC, and I brought this to his attention and I've requested an investigation. I've yet to hear back from him. The big push for a vaccine is proving to be a disaster, as we hear daily about people dying and having very serious side effects. And yet, people are being threatened with loss of their jobs if they do not take the vaccine. This is in violation of our Constitution, but because the media is promoting the no new normal, along with our Prime Minister, until there is a vaccine, business owners are actually going along with this. And I plead with you, please don't. Please don't put your employees in this position. I'm being contacted weekly by individuals who are at currently hold positions in medical clinics and other jobs where their management or their bosses are telling them that they won't have a job unless they take a vaccine. Can you imagine, especially when you know the risks that are being associated with this vaccine? Meanwhile, we can see Trudeau and Klaus Schwab are sitting back and having a good laugh as they prepare for the Great Reset. But I want to also tell you about some good news. And that is that if you're willing to take a stand against the tyranny, I think we can win this war. And the reason is we're seeing some great outcomes that are being won in the courts and through civil disobedience. This is one of the reasons why Action for Canada has retained Rocco Collati, and we're commencing legal action against the BC and federal government and against health officers and against municipalities and etc. Because we believe that this is the way to win this and it's going to be in the courts. But the other way is through civil disobedience. And for one, I want to say, as far as the courts are concerned, there was a big win in Germany where the German court recently ruled against the lockdowns, saying they are catastrophically wrong and violate human dignity. And as far as civil disobedience, there was 50,000 restaurant owners in Italy, and they defied the orders. And as a result, the government their measures have completely been overturned. 2 other countries since have followed suit. Action for Canada is not only holding seminars for businesses, but we're doing the same for pastors and church leaders. As a result, many churches will be opening their doors and exercising their civil liberties. And we are encouraging business owners to do the same. I could go on, but let's get to the Q&A with Rocco Collati, Canada's top constitutional lawyer, as I mentioned. We're excited to have the Q&A and get some of your questions answered. I just want to let you know that if you are listening to the recorded version of the seminar, we will not be including the time with Rocco Collati, as there are those who are intent on misconstruing his responses in an effort to take him down. To protect Rocco and ensure he is able to continue his fearless work, the Q&A will only be heard live. So we want to thank you for your understanding, and we would encourage you to join with Action for Canada. Make sure that we have your email information so that when we have future presentations, which we will be doing, that you will be included, and hopefully we'll be having more Q&A with Rocco Collati and get some more of your questions answered. So for now, we're going to turn the recorder off and go into a Q&A time. And yeah, so we'll get at this. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rocco. That was so informative. Just as a reminder, if you're watching the webinar via recording, we have removed the portion with Rocco. And so we're just going to carry on. And I want to encourage you to visit Rocco's website, Constitutional Rights Center, and listen to the great resources that he has made available for business owners regarding all different kinds of matters. We further recommend that you use the material on Action for Canada's webpage to educate your staff and board members. We've created resources specifically for businesses, and it includes the following: business declaration, and this is to be signed and sent to your premier and health officer, advising them that you will no longer comply with the orders because they are unlawful, unconstitutional, they're inconsistent and irrational. And we encourage you also to have your staff sign this declaration as well. We're provided instructions on how to interact with law enforcement, how to file a complaint against law enforcement. Charter rights, Privacy Act, etc. is also provided as a resource. We have provided Action for Canada business campaign material, an example of how the business campaign is working in action, and videos from Rocco Collati on your rights, as well as a list of resources that we've mentioned here today covering masks, the PCR testing, the charts, etc. In closing, we encourage you to provide us with your feedback so that we can be sure to incorporate your ideas and requests in future presentations as we continue to work to support, educate, and equip you. You can email us at call2@actionforcanada.com. As mentioned, we are a not-for-profit organization and we are fully funded by donors. We are in need of donations to support our ongoing work and of course the legal action. So please consider donating to action4canada.com/donate. As a note, PayPal has recently shut us down, claiming that we do not meet their community standards. It would appear that standing up for our freedom and our constitutional rights is a threat to the left's agenda. We will have another payment option available shortly. Currently, we have e-transfer and payment by check available. I want to again give a special thank you to our guest, Rocco Galati, for taking the time out of his very busy schedule to join us and answer questions, and to Vincent for providing us with tools needed to engage with law enforcement. We encourage you, business owners, to rise up in defense of not only your businesses, but also your families and this nation. Action for Canada is here to support you in whatever way we can. Thank you for joining us today, and God bless you.